It's part 2 of our story why Natali made a huge mistake buying an A-class property. Today it's all about her mistakes. That's today's episode. Let's dive in.
Already you've hurt my feelings.
That's Natali Morris. I'm Clayton Morris. Welcome to the Investing in Real Estate show. And I'm super excited because last time on the show we talked about my mistakes and how I went through foreclosures, had deficiency judgment, invested in some raw land, speculative land projects, all kinds of hoo-ha. And today we're going to talk about Natali's mistakes in real estate investing. But this is part 2 of a broader journey, right?
You're so excited about this?
I am.
I'm super
finally.
excited. We get to talk about all of Natali's mistakes. All right.
So let's talk about,
yes,
how many episodes and what
true.
we're doing, right?
Okay. Natali's mistakes will only be one episode of a 5-part series. And the impetus for this series is that we hope to prove to you that our journey becoming real estate investors is relatable, is doable, right? Because we want to take you through who we are, where we've been, where we've come from, and how we got to this point in our lives. We're now in the beginning of 2018. Last year, Clayton left his day job, and now we own about 50 properties. We cash flow those 50 properties about $40,000 a month, and neither of us have to work. So we spend all of our time helping other people become real estate investors, come up with a plan to be financially free. And we're not trained in any kind of financial advice. We just want to inspire other people to do what we've done. So we hope to use this 5-part series to tell you who we are, where we've been, how we've done it, so that you can figure out how you can do it in your own way.
Right. So start with episode 1, please, in the series, so you can watch that first, so you'll understand the backstory of all of this. But yeah, it's really about now we run a successful real estate company called Morris Invest, and so we have hundreds of clients around the world. We've rehabbed thousands of properties to help other families build passive income and cash flow. We started it just for ourselves. We were just rehabbing our properties, placing tenants, and cash flowing. And then we had friends and family started coming to us and said, "Hey, could I buy a $50,000 property? Can you show me how to do it?" And we said, "Yeah, we do it all. We'll do it for you. We'll take care of you. I'll put my team on it." And then it just grew from there over the past many years, and it's just been a real blessing. And we've been able to help hundreds of people. And I love the holidays too. And I say this not as a pat on the back, but I do love like the Christmas cards that we get from families that we've never even met face to face, but they own now 7 properties with us, or 10 properties, and we get to see their kids growing up. I mean, it's an amazing feeling. So that's part of our journey. That's where we are now. But let's go back to Natali's pain. Let's go back to the failures. I want you
so much pain.
If you're driving, I want you to feel the pain, the suffering. And it was not when Natali and I came together and we met. I know that she had this apartment, but I think you almost kind of, I don't want to say like ignored it, but I would hear you like on the phone just getting so pissed off and angry about this.
That's where we're starting? Okay.
Well, where do you want to start?
Sure.
Do you want to start before that? Start before that then.
Well, don't you think we should? Because I didn't just magically have this apartment.
Okay.
Like there was a story behind
Right.
this apartment. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. My mom never let me go to the prom, and my dad didn't show up at my dance recital. No, those things are okay. So yes, I was raised by real estate investors, and I always had this idea that owning your own real estate was a great way to build wealth. I saw it in my own family. My grandparents, my dad's parents, they both had real estate that they had invested in early on. I guess early in their marriage. I don't know at what point in their marriage. They both were on their second marriages, and they so they were later in their careers when they got together. And they both had a lot of experience sort of taking care of themselves. And, this was 30s, 40s, like they had bootstrapped a lot for themselves. They were both wise, I want to say. And so they bought some land. They bought some, I wonder I don't know. They owned some warehouses later in their lives that they had paid off like 20 years before I even knew about them. So this was the 80s. These properties had been paid off since the 60s. And I actually don't know if they bought it as land or if they bought them as warehouses that were already built as warehouses. I think they bought it as land. Because right now, what's on those warehouses is like an oil change shop and some other businesses. My dad still owns them, actually. So talk about buy and hold. This has been in our family for 50, more than 50 years now. Um, and so my grandmother, they got divorced when I was a child, and my grandmother used to go down to the bank, and she would say, grandma needs some money, and she didn't like have credit cards or the internet to just like Amazon Prime herself some groceries, right? So
Right.
she would say, "Can you take me to the bank?" And I'd say, "Sure," because by then I had my driver's license, and she would go to the bank and be like, "Rents came in. So I'm going to take some money out and then, I need to go to the market for some bread." And I'd be like, all right. So I always understood that my grandmother had this passive income that continued into her elderly years that she could live off of. And I remembered I was just thinking about Christmas Eve with my grandma, and she would give us each a little white envelope, like not the big ones, but the little ones, that you lick
Right.
with pointy envelopes, and she would have our names written on it in her script, and she would give us these crisp $50 bills that she would get from her rental, like Merry Christmas, and that's what we got because she couldn't see very well, so she couldn't go out and go shopping, but she would give us money. And so I always had this idea that if you owned real estate, then you would be able to, have some money coming in. My dad, once his parents died, he inherited a plot of land, a pretty big plot of land in Union City, California. So it's right in the heart of the Bay Area. Like it's right in the middle of the East Bay. And so it's a really good commercial land. And now there's like a huge Kaiser there, and there's a lot down there. It wasn't quite as much there when I was growing up in this specific area, but off the highway, if you know Union City. And so my dad had his business there for a long time. He had his landscaping business. And then his parents decided to sell it, or maybe it wasn't even that plot of land. I don't remember completely. This is like I'm peripherally aware of it in my childhood, right? And so they sold the land, and my parents both had a share of it. And so, it all went to their brothers and sisters, and they cut it up. And so my parents had a good chunk of cash. And so they wanted to then take that cash and immediately reinvest it because they didn't want to pay the taxes on this inheritance. And they bought this relatively mid-size apartment complex in Fremont, which is a very expensive city in the Bay Area. And they bought it for, I remember it was like 1 point something million. So it was 8 units. And my dad found it. I don't know how. And he said, we're taking grandma and papa's money and we're buying this apartment complex. He said, I want you to come with me to meet the guy who's selling it because his wife is going to show us how they run the books and, basically the ins and outs of owning this property that they had owned for, I don't know how many years they had owned it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a really formative experience because I went with my dad to this guy's house, and he lived in a pretty nice area. I want to say in the Oakland Hills. And his wife sat me down and said, okay, I'm going to show you my books. And she opened up a notebook, and she had that lined note paper that you can buy in Staples,
Right.
and it was like unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. And she had the ledger for when each one paid its rent and what the expenses were for that. And that actually informs how I manage our properties now, because I remembered. So when we bought our first apartment, or we didn't buy an apartment, when we bought our first single family, I remembered thinking back to this lady's ledger, and I just created the same thing on Excel because it worked for her. And she, you put it all on paper because she's like, well, if someone comes with me for some is a check and some is money, I need to write that down. So I erased this. And she was so meticulous, and she had done it with joy. Like they really enjoyed working together, this old couple.
But she also was managing the properties themselves, right? So
that's what he did. Like and then he decided he was done with it. He wanted to sell it. Gosh, he could have, if he had just waited, he could have got so much more for it because the Bay Area then the housing market really exploded. It was always expensive in the Bay Area, but then it really exploded. And
Right.
now, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what my dad is getting on rents there. My dad still manages that as well. So you're talking about generational wealth. Like this has been passed down now. This is wealth that my parents, I mean, you think about like what you can do with a dollar, right? You can take a dollar and you can buy a really expensive latte, right? And then
Right.
poof, that dollar's out of your family forever, right? Or you can take a dollar and you can invest it in some real estate. And then look now, I'm the third generation that will inherit that wealth. Those dollars really continued to work for my grandparents for
Well,
three generations down.
and
So
that's what.
these are really formative experiences. I don't think I really understood how much they were at the time. And I never thought, well, I'm going to do that too. I think I was always putting it in the treasure chest.
Well, and that's why it's so important. But it's interesting that, here's the thing. That's what we talk about on this podcast all the time and on this show is building legacy wealth for you and your family. It's not just
Right.
about, you know, we recently, it's not just about the asset. It's about the cash flow. It's about the legacy wealth that
Right.
you're building. It's about building a dynasty. For
Yeah.
think about these dynasties that are around for generations, right? That don't get everything wiped away, but that go back hundreds of years. Like think about
Yeah.
your family as a dynasty, and that's what we try to do here on this show, and that's what you were seeing the beginning stages of when you were, when you were sitting down at this woman's table. It's amazing.
Right. And my parents and my grandparents really had the idea that cash flow was the goal. So they never got caught up in the appraisal, right? Imagine if like the appraisals on the warehouse and the land that my grandparents owned like had upset them and they walked away from it. Then what, right? Then like who cares what it appraised for? It's now paid for their families living for 5 decades,
Right.
right? That's crazy town. So they didn't get hung up on that. They knew that what they wanted was passive income. They knew these things would rent. That's all they cared about. My dad did, actually, my mom and dad, they did try and do a flip in the Bay Area when I was a teenager, and that went really wrong for them. It didn't make me think like, oh, buy and hold is better and flips are bad. But if I sort of rewind the tape and look at my experiences, I remembered they went in on an apartment. It wasn't an apartment. It was an A-class home that they were able to get off market because my mom worked in real estate. I don't know if she found it or one of her friends found it, but they went in with a couple of other families that we were friends with, and they decided we're going to fix up this home and sell it. And then the market tanked right
There you
when they
go.
finished it, and it really taxed their friendships with
Oh,
these
I
people.
bet.
And I remembered I remembered my dad being there a lot. I remembered them being really stressed out about it. And I remembered them not really making money. Now, this was in Pleasanton, California, which now homes in Pleasanton do not go for less than $1 million. It's just that area has really exploded. It's, an extension of the Silicon Valley. There are a lot of high tech jobs there. If they had just waited it out, they definitely would have made their money. But the holding costs were high, the taxes were high. It was a really, really, really stressful thing for them. So that was kind of their foray into flipping. And then they were like, nope, never again. We're just going to keep what we've got and then live off the rental income. So then, I always thought like ownership of real estate's a good thing. I had bought I bought a house that I lived in Las Vegas, back when that market was pretty hot, when I lived in Vegas for a little bit after graduate school. And I sold that house when the market was still high. So I had some money to use up, and I moved to San Francisco. I had the money from the profit of that. I remember so clearly it was $87,000 that I had from the sale of that property. And so I was working a low level PR job in San Francisco. That was tech public relations. And so I wasn't making very much, but I had enough to make a down payment. And I wanted to buy in San Francisco because I was living there and I was like, this is where my life is. It was like I'm starting anew, right? Single girl. I want to live in the city. Didn't want to be on the East Bay with my parents. And so my mom helped me find a condo that was down on Harrison Street. And It's called Soma now, that neighborhood of San Francisco. It's south of Market. And now there are a ton of luxury condos down there that you can buy. But at the time there weren't all that much. It was down by, there was like a Gordon Biersch there. There was a club I used to go to when I was like 21 years old, was right up the street. I never went when I lived there, but it was like a bridge and tunnel club. I don't know why that's relevant, but
It's
it was
not.
important to me at the time.
It's really not relevant. I hate to break it to you. These mundane details
right.
about the clubs you went to, not really important.
There was like a bodega in the bottom floor and they sold really chalky hot chocolate. So, okay, I lived in
Again,
this apartment.
another detail we don't need.
If you want to know all the details that are completely, yeah, just these are just the memories that I have. So I was able to buy this condo and I lived there and I wanted to live there. And my mom co-signed on the loan because I made such pennies at the time in my job. And so I moved in and I was able to walk to work because it was so close to downtown San Francisco. And then after about a year, that neighborhood was just so industrial and all of my friends lived in a cooler neighborhood down in the marina, and I decided I didn't want to live in Soma anymore. And so I decided to rent out the condo because I wanted to keep it, but I didn't want to live there. It just wasn't cool enough for me. So but the problem was the condo, so I remember my mortgage was $1,800. But it was an adjustable rate mortgage. So in 5 years, it was going to adjust. But the dues on that condo, because it was downtown San Francisco and they had, there was a pool and there was a gym and there was some really nice doormen. There was super crazy association lady who ran it, who was always upset with me for some reason or the other.
How much? So your mortgage was $1,800. Was your homeowners association dues included in the mortgage?
No, it was an extra $500 a month, and at the time it was $460, and it went up about $20 a year every month. And so that was so expensive because it's not a tax deduction. I don't think it is your HOA on your own. I actually don't know that for sure, but I don't think.
I mean, if you own it in an LLC,
it would be a business expense. But otherwise, it's so.
But not if you own it as a primary residence.
And the taxes on that condo, just a tiny little condo, were around $6,000 a year, which was a ton for me because already that mortgage was a stretch. I was making about $37,000 a year, not very much at all. So I had to find renters that would cover my expenses as well as the taxes. So it was always tough for me to find. And so I kept it. I had some pretty good tenants actually the first couple of years, and I lived in San Francisco as well. I never had a property manager because I felt like I just couldn't find the room in my budget for it because I was barely finding renters to cover my expenses. But if something broke down, for instance, my first tenant, her garbage disposal broke. So I called my sister's husband at the time, and I was like, Juan, please, can you please go replace the garbage disposal? So he went to Home Depot, he went and installed it, but it was a humongous pain in the butt for him because he lived in the East Bay. And then to like go there and get permission from this crazy property manager who never wanted us to go. Like there was always some rule, like you can't come on Wednesdays at 2. I was like, okay, can we come on Thursday at 1? No, because she was just always super mad that I would ask for permission for any kind of maintenance person ever.
And you're doing this from thousands of miles away.
No. At the time I still lived in.
So you were already, you were still dealing with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that was okay. But then when I moved to New York a few years later, I got a job opportunity with CBS, with CNET at the time, which became CBS. And so I moved all the way across the country. And then it was really tough because then if it was like, I remembered I got some emergency calls, like toilets backed up. And I was like, okay, I'll call Roto-Rooter. And I'm on a different time zone. It would have been easier for me to just say, you call Roto-Rooter, send me the bill, and we'll take it off your rent. Then, I had some really reliable ladies, specifically these girls, single girls who were engineers who lived in my condo and were great tenants. And they always paid on time and it was easy. But then when those tenants left and the market took a dive, I could not rent that condo out for what my expenses were.
Okay, so let's break down those numbers before you move on. So
Okay.
it was $1,800 a month for your mortgage.
Yeah.
And then on top of that was about $500 in a homeowners association, which
Yeah.
if you've watched our YouTube channel, you know I have a whole video on HOAs and why I got burned, and I would never buy investment properties with a homeowners association because there's a whole host of reasons. I mean, they can change the bylaws kind of at any time they want. They can do all sorts of things to you. I've heard horror stories. Just read the comments thread on our YouTube channel on that video, and there are people like, "Oh my God, I got burned from an HOA." So you were paying an additional $500 a month for the homeowners association on top of the $1,800. So that's $2,300 a month. Were there other things on top of that you were having to deal with?
The taxes. Well, the taxes.
The
Yeah,
taxes.
were
Well, yeah, of course.
expensive. Right.
Okay, so that's what you were paying, and then what were you able to rent it for?
Well, it really ran the gamut. I think when I first started renting it out, it was around, I want to say $2,000 a month. But then when the market really took a dive, I could barely get 1,300 for it. So I took a loss on it every month of around
So you were
almost
always,
$1,000.
well, yeah, but you were always taking a loss.
Right.
So
But
right from the
when you
get-go,
include taxes, right. Yeah, I was. Yeah. So I never really made money. And I would always, my mother was a co-signer and I was like, Mom, I want to sell this. And for a while I think I want to say I paid 460 for it, $460,000. And remember I told you that $87,000 profit that I put down. And then my mom helped me with a little bit of the extra. So she was always like a partner in it. But she wouldn't let me sell it because she's like, oh, it's going to be worth so much. It's going to be worth so much. And she was right. It was worth a ton, or it is worth a ton now. If I had kept it, I would have probably been able to sell it for twice. But at the time, I was just bleeding money. And we had just had, I think when we sold it, we had just had Ava. So we just had our second child and we were like, this is strapping us. We can't keep doing this. It's too expensive. So we sold it years after we got married, but it was 2014 when we sold it. So when the market really hit a dive, I couldn't even get 1,300 for it. And I remembered I got this couple and they were not married and they both paid their rent separately by check, and together it amounted to 1,350. So I was taking a loss on it, but this couple was from hell because you don't want me to say that?
no, I do want you to say it, but
Oh,
just bear in
roll
mind,
your eyes at me.
no, bear in mind that this is an A-class property. Okay, so this is again when people are like this perception of A-class, you think, wow, these tenants are going to be A-class. No,
Yeah.
guess what? They end up being more pains in the butts than anybody that lives in a C-class property. That doesn't mean you're not going to have repairs on a
Right.
C. Of course, you're going to have carpet and things like that to deal with, but they were from hell, and that's often the case with A-class tenants. They end up causing the biggest problems. They're the biggest pains in the butt. Not only just from what the physical damage was, but they call you at 2 a.m. There was all kinds of issues that they had, right?
Right. Yeah. So they had this dog that completely destroyed the carpet. They were always fighting with the homeowners association fee over one thing or the other. And they would call me, the homeowners association would be like, they tried to take their dog up the elevator at this time of night and that's not allowed. And then she was really rude to me. And I'm like, this is like managing children. I don't know what they expected me to say to them. And I was like, I don't really want to deal with this. I can't tell you how she should behave. She's just a tenant, you know. When they moved out, the place was trashed. And so I sent my realtor the person who found me rentals. And he was like, this place looks like a total dump. The walls, there's piss all over the carpet. I'm pretty sure it was dog piss, but I cannot be sure. They had left huge holes in the walls. They destroyed, there was stains on the kitchen counters. It cost me a ton of money. So I kept their deposit and I was like, I'm going to keep this and pay for these repairs. And she knew her rights because California is very tenant friendly. And she's like, you can't keep it for these things. You can only keep it for these things. And she was willing to take me to court over the things that she wouldn't pay for, that the law did not make her pay for. She was a total B word. And, like I said, at the
Hold
time
on,
I was making, no, let me just make this point, and then I do want you to ask your question.
okay. Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate that.
So at the time, like I said, I was getting $1,350 for this apartment for these two people, and they did not even always pay on time. But I went to Rent-O-Meter just now before we started the show, and that condo right now rents for an average of $4,000. So it's twice. Like, I could have been making that, right? Because the market fluctuated so much. And that's not to say that when we hit the next market fluctuation, I wouldn't be back to $1,350, right? But I do want to drive home your point that these were A-class properties. If right now I could get $4,000 a month for it, that proves your point that that's an A-class property. And it was a huge pain in the butt.
Huge pain in the butt. And then these big market swings that we see in Manhattan and other A-class places like San Francisco, where, let's say you've got you own 10 units in that building, and you have a $2 million mortgage on the properties, and you're able to cover your mortgages because the rents are $4,000 a month. Well, what happens when the market takes a complete dump in an A-class neighborhood? C-class historically stays stable because the rents are stable. Those are the people that tend not to lose their jobs in a big downturn. They work at the local, distribution centers. They're long-haul truckers. They're nurses at the local hospital. Those are the stable areas. We saw it in Detroit. The same areas where we invest in Detroit, they didn't lose their jobs. It was on the front cover of Forbes magazine about 2 months ago. That exact story talking about those exact neighborhoods where we invest did not lose their jobs. But the A-class neighborhoods in Detroit got hammered. Those are the companies, that left, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, my point is that, yes, then you see these big swings in that market. So that was one point. The other point is that then you were upside down from the very beginning with this property, even without the taxes, right? The $1,800 a month plus the HOA fee is $500. That's $2,300, and you were only able to get $2,000. So even with the HOA, you were underwater. Then tack on the taxes. So right out of the gate, it was not a smart investment. Like, if you were holding it as a flip, it didn't make sense. Like, the mechanics of it just didn't make sense, and you were holding on to it for emotional reasons, which is point number 3, right? Which is, don't get emotional when it comes to real estate. Your mom was like, "You should."
I don't know how emotional I was.
Well, your mom was
out.
Emotional about it.
I wanted out by the time I moved to New York. I was like, I don't want to deal with this, And she, like I said, she was right. It would have eventually been a good, like right now, it would have been a good sell, right? Or right now, it would have been I would have been able to make some money back. But I had to really deal with a lot of crap. And, if I think about what we could do with that amount of money, right? And like, if we really run the numbers, like, I don't think I've gone through. Should we run the numbers on what was?
Yeah, I remember my other point that I was going to say.
Okay, so you make that point, and I'll do some quick calculations.
You do some numbers, but I was going to say the other point that I wanted to make is about the landlord-friendly states. Okay, this is incredibly important. What Natali just said about the landlord-friendly states. So we only really invest in landlord-friendly states, and that's not to say we have some properties in New Jersey, but. And not terribly landlord friendly in the state of New Jersey. But California is definitely not. It's one of the worst in the country for for landlords, meaning it's very tenant friendly. And so if you have to get an eviction or you have to go through all these processes, guess what? The landlords kind of crap out of luck in California. They can stay in that property for a long time, and it can take many, many, many months to get an eviction if you're dealing with someone like that. So it can be a royal pain. A whole video series, we have audio and everything that we talk about the most landlord-friendly states. So please check out that content. We've put it out there. It's on our channel. You can watch it, listen to it, and we talk about Indiana being one of the best. We talk about Florida. We talk about Ohio. We talk about these other states in the Midwest where it's very It's very landlord friendly. Landlord friendly means you can get an eviction quickly. They have no tolerance for people that don't pay rent. You do not have to go through that same rigmarole with security deposits like what Natali was just describing. So all of those things make a state landlord friendly as opposed to tenant friendly.
So I just did some numbers on this, which I'm sure I did back when we sold it. But at the time in 2014, we already had some rental properties that were performing at about 10% cash return. And we can teach you how to do that in another episode. This is not the time to do math, but I'm going to tell you what my math is. Most of our properties that we own now do at least 10%, on average 12. That property, given that I paid $460,000 for it, and I was making around, I'm going to say for the time I owned it, an average of $2,000 a month, was performing at 3%. Yuck. 3%. Even now, if I kept it and was making $4,000, that still would only be 6%. So of course I can do better with that money, right? I can buy several that perform at 10% rather than just this one big chunk that's making 6%. So, yeah. It took a lot of, though, convincing of my mom. I was like, Mom, I just don't want to do it anymore. So I sold it in 2014, and I did make a little bit. I sold it for, I think, $525. So I made some of that money back. I was able to pay my mom back and was able to just wash my hands of it. And it felt great because, every time those fees went up, on the HOA, that sucked. Every time the taxes went up, that really sucked. And I was always like, how am I going to make this work? And then dealing with the actual tenants. If I wanted to keep that property, I should have found a good property manager. I should have done that from the start, because using your brother-in-law is not a permanent solution unless your brother-in-law is a property manager.
And then they get phone calls, at 2 a.m. for someone complaining about someone using the elevator. Like, that's not what we teach, right? We talk about what we do at Morris Invest, which is turnkey, right? So then you don't have to deal with phone calls like that. No heat calls. Right now, the team is dealing with people don't know how to turn pilot lights on and deal with their furnaces because it's -8 degrees. It's like, do you want that phone call? Like, do you want to deal with frozen pipes and all that kind of stuff? No.
Yeah.
No.
Right. So, it was not a great experience, but it wasn't so bad that it discouraged me from investing in real estate. So then several years later, when Clayton came to me and said, I'm all in on investing in real estate. I met this couple, they went to New Zealand for 2 months because they own rental real estate. We're going to do that too. I didn't feel burned. I was just like, okay, but we got to find a way to make it easier, because I have been a landlord for a long time and I didn't love it. But at the same time, we both, had high paychecks. We both had really good careers, but we're finding a hard time making ends meet. So I was game for a new solution. I don't know how I would have come to this solution on my own. I remembered sitting in my office at CNET and thinking, okay, I had just got my contract. I was making, should I say what I was making? I guess it doesn't matter. Sure. So my new contract was, I made $137,000 a year, which Clayton pointed out on the previous podcast was half of what he made, less than half. So,
yep, I had to get that little dig in.
But, for a single girl living in Manhattan, that was really good money. And even though my rent was high, I still had some expendable income because it was just me. I had no kids. I even had wardrobe paid for me back then because I was on the air. So I was like, okay, I should invest in some real estate. So I remember just going to Google and thinking like, best investment markets to invest in real estate, and come up with some like crap Forbes article that told me that
you should invest in San Francisco or something. No,
it wasn't San Francisco. I think it was like, I don't remember exactly where. And I was like, Raleigh, well, what do I do with this? I don't know. Then what? And I didn't know where to go. I was like, should I call a realtor in this market? And I kind of like, I got about, I think people say the average like Google search is like 4 clicks deep or something. And then people give up and they're like, I got what I needed. Right. And I probably got about 4 clicks deep. And then I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Forget it. And I gave up on the idea. And I probably did it once or twice. And, I never went to the next step that Clayton went to, which was actually deciding I'm going to learn about real estate investing and then listening to podcasts incessantly, trying to listen to other people's success stories and figuring out what worked for us. Clayton really is an autodidact in every sense of the word, which is one of my favorite words. It means that you're self-taught. You taught yourself something. So he just decided to seek out other people who knew what he was doing, surrounding himself with this culture, and made it happen. And so I came along for the ride with this background of like, yes, I know this works. My grandparents lived very comfortable retirements, and I've seen my parents then have some success at this. And I can come along from the ride, but I need it to be easier than the way I had it. So that's how we decided to, invest in real estate together. But that was my story. That's where I came from. So, I didn't have, when we talked about the challenges of how your credit was ruined when we decided to invest in real estate. At that time, I didn't have that $137,000 salary anymore. I had lost my job at that time. And so my challenge was that I had the credit, but not the salary. Your challenge was you had the salary and not the credit. So, that was not a very good combination. So that's why we had to teach ourselves from podcasts and, going to meetups and meeting people. So this was the challenge. So we're going to talk to you in another episode about how we solved it.
Yeah, and I'm also excited too about the idea of the 4 Google clicks deep. It's like I've really wanted to make this channel, like our Morris Invest channel and our website, not difficult for people to find, and so that it can be easy for people to get started in real estate investing, and they don't have to like call a realtor and you're going to overpay for some property. Then you're going to have to build a team and, hire contractors and all of that stuff. Like, I'm proud of the fact that like we can do it with one click now. That was kind of the goal, right? Is to not have to make people search around and they get frustrated and then never take action because it's so overwhelming. So if you
that's exactly what I did.
Right. You were just like, I got to go to lunch now. I can't do this.
I think I can. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, someone's IMing me. I'd rather read my IMs.
Someone's calling my office. I got to go. I can't. Then you forget and you get distracted and you're like, oh, I was going to try to look into real estate investing, but you know what? It just seemed like overwhelming. So it doesn't have to be. The whole point of this channel and everything we teach you is we've literally given you all of the tools on this channel. Like from step 1, figuring out ROI, where to invest, C-class properties. It's all here. Every piece of it is right here.
And the irony of it is that I was a podcaster. Like I was one of the original video podcasters, the very first to the industry. And I never thought that I could learn from podcasts. It just did not occur to me at all. And then, I just married a guy who thought outside the box. That's you, darling.
Thank you. And
you're welcome.
And it can be overwhelming. You can go down rabbit holes where you start. So I would just say pick one, like we invest in single family properties. That's our bread and butter. And that's what we talk about on this show, buy and hold real estate for the purposes of creating legacy wealth. That's our show. That's our channel. That's everything we do.
Right.
I would say stay with one course of action. And if it's not ours, like you don't like our course of action, this is how we've built wealth. We've helped hundreds of clients build wealth this exact same way. If it's not for you and you want mobile home park investing, you want 100-unit apartment complex investing, this is not for you. Well, that's not what we do, right? So follow one course of action. There's so much information out there. It can be scattered all over the place, but you can get shiny object syndrome and you can start going off in 80 different directions and then you never take action because you're so overwhelmed. So just stick with one straight course and stay focused, and then I think you will see success in short order if you stick with it. So that's
ding,
my little
ding, ding. Thank you, honey.
That's my news. That's my news you can use at the very end here. All right. So we've exhausted your time today. I'm excited. So this was part 2 of our series on challenges, our real estate failures. That was Natali's story. Coming up in part 3 of our journey, this is the one you're going to want to get out your, well, we've got a couple, but we're going to talk about our turning points and losing our jobs and what we went through when that happened. Losing our jobs, not having a salary, and then also having to deal with like wanting to take action and build wealth. How do you do that? How do you have no money and turn everything around? So we're going to talk about our turning points on the next episode. Any final thoughts?
No.
Great.
I don't think so. I've given it all to you. Yeah. But I do want to say, I know my parents do listen to our podcast sometimes, and, I am very, very grateful that I was raised by the rich dads. They both were, it was rich dad, rich mom. They never were afraid. Even if they were afraid, they didn't show it. They would come up with a lot of scary financial scenarios, and they always approached it like, okay, I can do that, and I hope that my kids see us doing that as well. And, I don't want them to see us being wasteful. I don't think my parents were wasteful with money at all. But I always saw them take it seriously, approach it as a team, and be cautious and confident at the same time. It was a really, really powerful combination, the two of them, because, my dad had this entrepreneurial spirit and my mom had this great stewardship. And I really believe that money goes to people who are great stewards of it. And it ended up they were a great team. Wasn't the best marriage, didn't last, but as a team, like business wise, there was nothing they couldn't do. And so I'm grateful for that, because I don't think I realized until I started to tell my story how formative these experiences were. My dad taking me to this old guy's house saying, this is how these people run their business as a family. Or my mom, watching her like move all the papers around in her office and try and make the money work and say, well, this is how we're going to do this then. And I always do this. Like, she's so diligent about these kind of things. And, I'm really grateful for that. And I hope that we can do the same thing for our kids.
And that's what we try to teach you here on the show, which is to teach these things to your children. It's incredibly important about how you talk to your children about wealth. And so I like to think that over the past, month, while this tax bill was being written and it was under the wire, and you and I were sitting there at dinner having discussions about how this tax bill will impact our family. What do we need to do in this last week before the year? Do we prepay our property taxes? Do we do this? Do we do that? What do we need to do? And we were treating it as a game, and it was fun, and it wasn't scary. And our kids overheard this and heard us talking about that. And we were having these discussions about what this tax bill would mean for our company and our family. And so we want you to be able to do the same things around your table, because those are formative discussions. Well,
yeah. I mean, the way that you approach your finances makes a humongous difference, because Clayton was always afraid and his parents were always afraid, build time, mortgage time, all of that stuff. And,
and I became afraid as a result. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never felt afraid, even when, I was making no money, that sometimes my checkbook was in the red. But I always kept a balanced checkbook, and I always knew where the money was and how to fix it. And I always felt like there is a confidence about me that came not just mostly from this competence that my parents gave me. And so, the two of us together, we made a pretty good team, because Clayton's daring and entrepreneurial, and I'm organized and, confident when it comes to money. So that's a good, so a lot of times, I do these other podcasts and people say, well, what if you don't like spreadsheets? And, what if your husband doesn't want to invest in real estate and you don't like real estate? And I say, well, play to your strengths. Just find what you do like, and then make that part of your family business routine. So, I'm exceedingly grateful for my parents, but also for you, because so little of the money that comes into our house is on a paycheck with my name on it. So often it's paychecks with Clayton's name on it, but it's me who can then be like, okay, I'm going to rock this, right? And then I take it and I do something great with it. But most of the money has his name on it, and my competence is something different. So, I'm grateful for my parents and for you.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. That's out there now in the public. Thank you very much.
But don't go repeating it. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell anybody. It's now public. My wife loves me. All right. We will see you back here on episode 3 of this podcast. But remember, we publish this show 3 times a week. If you're listening to the audio version of this, please check it out. We also have tons of great videos on our YouTube channel. But
can I just interrupt you? So if you are listening to the audio version, this series will only come out every Wednesday. It won't be concessive. Is that a word?
Concessive? No, that's not a word.
It won't be I don't know what I'm trying. You know what I'm trying to say, though. Is it will? Yes, that's the word. It's 10 o'clock at night.
I'm glad you interrupted me for that great point
to make
of wisdom.
That point. But the point is that if you expect this 5-point series consecutive in the podcast, it won't happen. Yeah. And on the YouTubes, it will.
Right. Or concussively. Now go out there, take action, become a real estate investor, It's the only true, real way to build fantastic wealth, legacy
Don't
wealth.
be constipated. That's also a C word.
Concussive. All right, we'll see you next time, everyone.
Bye.